You're listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Let's get ready to go against the grain. We're going to start the week off right with a packed show for you today. We're in a political climate, and even graduation speeches are not immune to points of attack. I originally was going to do the speech for Obama, but I changed the monologue to talk about Cuomo in a ProPublica piece. Cuomo is insufferable, and that insufferableness needs to be called out. A man with over 20,000 deaths in a city or state should not be that brimming with hubris. Let's say it that way to put it mildly. A bit later, we'll get into the fascinating discussion regarding the scam that is American healthcare, the exorbitant costs and the billions that go into the propaganda and the payoffs to ensure that our healthcare stays exactly the way it is. Broken and expensive. Later in the hour, pressure is mounting on China to allow an independent investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 virus. 120 nations have signed onto the UN motion despite China's explicit objection to that motion. We'll also discuss the Trump administration firing of an IG that was investigating Mike Pompeo. As Bob said this morning, this is not a good look. Not a good look indeed. In the second hour, we'll discuss Biden's campaign Latino outreach, or should we say lack thereof. There have been several alarms sounded over the past few months, from Obama alumni telling Biden to modernize his operations to Jeff Weaver, Sanders' 2016 campaign manager, telling he's losing the lefties. The latest signal flare is noting that Biden's lack of outreach to the Hispanic community and the danger of not getting sufficient percentage from this community can lose him this race. It's Monday. That means Miss the Press. Now, this is a fun segment that we have that we take time to lampoon Sunday morning talking heads, the narratives they spin versus the things they ignore and the things that they refuse to say. But let's start here. Let's start here. Every few days or so, I read The Wall of Shame. Basically, the Wall of Shame is the number of deaths that have taken place in this country. The people who are ill, the people who are sick, the people who are died, the people who lost their jobs, the people who lost their health care. Basically, the board of shame. All of these numbers that basically represent real human beings going through some kind of crisis of either health or economic condition. This resulted, in large part, from a weak reaction from the federal government. Basically, no reaction in real terms from the federal government that was more interested in economic concerns as opposed to concerns of human life. This also failed to some degree because of the arrogance of state governments that refused to listen to their scientists and their health departments until it was too late. ProPublica has just published an intriguing piece on how San Francisco reacted versus how New York reacted, and the material outcome of those policies on containing the coronavirus. The name of this piece is A Tale of Two Cities, San Francisco and New York. Two coasts, one virus, how New York suffered nearly 10 times the number of deaths as California. Now, personally, I can tolerate incompetence. There's nothing more human than to stomp your toe. Basically, there's nothing more human to err. But incompetence with the rancid stench of arrogance, that's a bit more stomach-turning. It's at this point that I want to take the time to introduce the insufferable governor of New York, Andrew Cuomo. Now, Governor Cuomo is the only person I'm aware of in the entirety of Earth history to implement policies resulting in over 28,000 deaths and be considered presidential material. A modicum of basic competence after ignoring your screaming health departments should not be paired with an extraordinary ego. And yet, here we are. Without the slightest sense of regret and with hundreds of people dying around him daily, at a briefing in April, Cuomo said, "Today, we can say we have lost many of our brothers and sisters, but we haven't lost anyone because we didn't get the right and the best health care that they could. The way I sleep at night is I believe that we didn't lose anyone that we could have saved. And that is the only solace when I look at these numbers and I look at this pain that has been created, that has been true. Basically, Cuomo is saying I sleep at night because everybody that has needed health care in this has gotten the health care, and we haven't lost anybody that we shouldn't have lost. Now, this is utterly ludicrous. The extraordinary statement is astonishing that a human being will say something like that. The confidence, the hubris. I can only marvel at the size of his testicles for a human being to stand there and look into millions of people in the face, in a camera, and say something like that. That is utterly absurd. For one, it is impossible for him to know that. Under the best of circumstances, it will be impossible for Cuomo to know that. And fact of the matter is, this was not the best of circumstances. For example, compare the second most populous city, San Francisco. On March 16th, with just under 40 cases of COVID-19 and 0 deaths, San Francisco issued the order banning all but essential movement. The mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, said, "I really feel like we didn't have a lot of options." What was New York doing at this time? Now, Breed sent a copy of her letter, her shelter-in-place order, to Bill de Blasio. Now, Cuomo reacted to Blasio's pushing for a shelter-in-place order with utter and complete hostility. No city in this state can quarantine itself without state approval, and I have no plan whatsoever at quarantining this city. On March 22nd, arrogance gave way to reality, and Governor Cuomo shut down the city he had no plan on shutting down. The case came 6 days after San Francisco, 5 days after de Blasio suggested, and 3 days after all of California had been shut down by Governor Gavin Newsom. By this point, New York was in the throes of an epidemic with the number of confirmed cases at 15,000, doubling every 3 or 4 days. Cuomo was also a month late in demanding hospitalization capacity, not responding to the need until March 16th. Now, ProPublica reports that one New York City official said that the critical days in March, we had pretty clear with the state about the implications of every day, every hour, every minute. Meaning that every day that went by was more people that was eating at restaurants, that was going to 7-Eleven, that was getting on subways, that was getting on trains, that was moving from one country or city to the next. It was spreading. And each person that bumped into someone else that got infected, that took it to someone else that got infected, basically expanded this virus over the course of a week in a way that didn't happen in California or in San Francisco. Yes, New York and San Francisco are two different cities, but the amount of time and the reaction from the standpoint of San Francisco's mayor, London Breed, versus the reaction of Governor Andrew Cuomo, this disparity showed up in the numbers of cases. That's the point I'm trying to make here. As of May 15th, there were 350,000 COVID-19 cases in New York and more than 27,500 deaths, nearly a third of the nation's total. The corresponding numbers in California, just under 75,000 cases and slightly more than 3,000 deaths. In New York City, the city's or the country's most populous and densest, there have been just under 20,000 deaths, while in San Francisco, the second densest and 13th most populous, there have been 35. I'm missing the undeserved hubris. I am utterly and entirely missing this undeserved hubris. If anything, New York deserves an apology, not this level of arrogance and collar popping. Unrepentant, in an interview last week, Cuomo said, "I don't think New Yorkers feel or Americans feel the government failed them here. I think they feel good about what government has done. Their healthcare system did respond. This was not Italy, with all due respect. There were not people in the hallways who didn't get healthcare treatment. Government didn't cause or allow anyone to die." But we know that's not true, right? I mean, you have the situation where some people refuse to go get healthcare. Just the week it took him to shut down and implement those policies in itself spread this particular disease in a way that might not have spread had New York shut down a week earlier, to the tune of thousands of people who may still be walking around and engaging with their families today. It's not an issue whether people could go to the emergency room or not. That's not really the point. The point is government policy and how that government policy affected those human beings in your city. You're in the densest city in this country. If anyone has ever been to New York, you would know exactly what I mean. It is impossible to walk around New York without bumping into people as you move through the city. My mom, when she visited New York for the first time, was stunned at the number of people and was getting mad that people were bumping into her. And I had to explain to her, look, you just walk to where you're going. People understand it. They can't necessarily get away from you. You just bump into them. It just is what it is. Keep your ass forward, walk. Now, in a city that dense, and you have a pandemic and a virus that spreads with a certain degree of intensity because of that level of density, Cuomo was slow at the bat. Now, again, that is not something that has collar popping. That is something that a response or that is specifically associated with government action. Because again, it is only government action that could take large precautions and functions and policies that would affect the vast amount of people who are in that particular city and that particular state. Bob, Cuomo is a smug SOB, and I'm going to make the point that Cuomo is full of you know what in this case. I don't get the smugness here. I don't get the arrogance. I mean, how do you collar pop?
Politics, Jamal.
28,000 deaths, though, and you're collar popping? I have no regrets.
No, of course.
No regrets.
He's a politician. Not sure what you want from them. And, London Breed's going to be the same. I was a little lost there with you were saying with San Francisco being, it's the second most dense population. I mean, obviously Los Angeles.
So California, so it's San Francisco. This is the country's second densest and 13th most populous. They're making a difference between dense versus popular.
A lot of people right next to each other. I don't know. It's the same. London breeds the same way, and Keisha Lance Bottoms in Atlanta. Mayor Muriel Bowser here in Washington, D.C., a city that has the highest per capita homeless rate in the country, is constantly touting how much she's done for homelessness. So all of these people are more than happy to tout their accomplishments. You're a politician. You're out there to get reelected. People support you. They want to feel like they're the ones doing it. You're just basically a projection onto society in many ways. And a lot of New Yorkers who haven't been impacted by COVID-19 feel some guilt, and the best way not to feel guilty anymore is pretend those you elected are doing the right thing. And so if Cuomo's out there saying, we did it, everyone, we're heroes, all those people that are not impacted, that are wealthy, the upper class, the bourgeois, can all say, you know what, we did do a good job. We did respond. And it was just a hard time that we pulled through. I mean, there's a narrative that has to be constantly driven. But Jamal, to your point, I mean, we're seeing how this is impacting people living in senior living facilities. That's a reflection of our society treats seniors. We're seeing how this impacts healthcare workers. And Andrew Cuomo closing hospitals across the state of New York has obviously been a huge factor in why so many medical and frontline workers have come down with COVID-19. And then we talked about prisons being an epicenter as well. And what does Andrew Cuomo do in the middle of a pandemic? He rolls back bail reform, which basically would keep people that are poor out of prison until they've actually been brought to trial. And if you're innocent until proven guilty, you should have the right to be at home if you can't afford bail. And so for Andrew Cuomo, again, to come back out, I mean, obviously we're looking at a moment of great hubris and everybody wants to take credit. And obviously it doesn't seem like you have to do much to take credit given the complete failure of both federal and local government. Yeah. So all he has to say is like, I'm better than Trump. And for a lot of people, Jamal, that seems to be enough. Jamal, we do need to take our first break of the hour. You got me worked up. Anytime I can go ahead and I'm more than happy to. In the first hour, we'll be talking about the economic impacts of COVID-19 pandemic on healthcare costs, the latest from the World Health Assembly, and the firing of a State Department whistleblower looking into questionable spending habits by Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. And if that's not enough for you misfits, don't worry. We have a second hour of news, politics, and culture after that. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
Look, up in the sky. It's a bird. It's a plane. It's
a Tic Tac UFO, man. Just like the one the U.S. Navy caught on video in 2004, but only came clean about it last year.
No, I'm pretty sure it was a bird.
Whatever.
Get nerdy on Wednesdays with Revelations. The Political Misfits look into the world's mysteries and a lot of UFO stuff.
Shooting from the lip. We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, the show that goes against the grain. My name is Jamal Thomas. I'm here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. Give us a like if you're digging this content. Also, be sure to share this video. We are growing, nearly 3,000 subscribers. You can also send chats, tweets, and you can give us a call at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Be sure to keep it PG. I know people get worked up, so I understand. So Bob, I wish to move on from the talking about Andrew Cuomo and getting into a failure in regards to our healthcare system. Now, I've always given Obama credit for cracking the consciousness of this nation in regards to the idea of Medicare for all. Part of it has to do with, basically, let's be honest, the failure of it, but part of it also has to do with just implementing a big policy like this, despite the fact that it was a Republican plan. It was modest, but it was enough for the public to either dream or to be able to conceive of having something larger in regards to single payer. And I do think it paved the way for the public to be able to conceive of such policy. That said, healthcare costs. When Clinton was running against Trump, people forget this, and this is not necessarily brought up as one of the issues of one of the reasons she lost, but healthcare costs were hitting 50% within the last few months of that presidential election. This is after 4 years of Obamacare, at the very least being implemented, roughly 4 years of Obamacare being implemented, and we're still having healthcare costs going up to 50%. This is, if there's one silver lining with this particular epidemic, it's that Medicare for All has now hit 88% approval by Democrats and 69% approval by independents. This policy has been able to basically grow and develop and exceed any other policy dealing with healthcare in the midst of a pandemic. It is a grim way to get here, but I appreciate that we are here. To discuss the forces keeping our healthcare system broken, expensive, and inefficient is the author of The Great American Healthcare Scam, How Kickbacks, Collusion, and Propaganda Have Exposed Healthcare Costs, or Exploded Healthcare Costs in the United States, Dr. David Belk. David, welcome to the show. Thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
So, David, I've had the opportunity to travel and had the opportunity to use healthcare systems around the world: Egypt, Kenya, Portugal, Germany, Warsaw. And every doctor that I had the opportunity to speak with in all of those countries basically said the same thing. I cannot believe your country has healthcare and runs it in the way that it runs healthcare. How did healthcare in the United States evolve to get to the point that it is now?
Well, I mean, I've written a lot about that, and a lot of it was a series of, accidents, adaptations to situations as they were, and as is often the case with, so many times that you adapt quickly to a situation, yesterday's solution becomes today's problem or morphs into today's problem, and a lot of people take advantage of a situation in a way that have been foreseen when they initiated the policy. You could say one of the original issues that got this ball rolling in the direction it is how we somehow decided to, I shouldn't say somehow, how we decided or created a policy during World War II, which allowed health insurance to suddenly be a benefit that employers offer far more than something you would ever purchase on your own. And that seems kind of benign. Okay, you can get your health insurance for work. It's a great perk. But, as that happened, it kind of morphed into a huge number of problems down the road. now basically we live in a country where if you don't have an employer provide you health insurance and you don't qualify for Medicare or Medicaid, it's extremely difficult to get any health insurance at all. And many of the employer-sponsored health insurance plans, well, they aren't the best for the employee, and they tend to be pretty rotten for the employer as well. And, I get into a lot of details about why that is now in my book, but, the overall issue is people purchasing health insurance are to the beneficiaries of that health insurance, which in and of itself implies a strong conflict of interest, right? And so that's one of the many, many problems that just kind of evolved in, our healthcare system. You could almost describe it as a system of somewhat random accidents that too many people are taking advantage of now, which is why there's so much resistance to change.
I see. I'm curious. So when many of the other countries, Canada or the countries in Europe moved to a single payer system, why was the United States left behind in that process? I mean, they were able to cut healthcare costs. They were getting better outcomes. What stopped the U.S. from making that transition?
Well, he first tried to do that transition in, the late 1940s, right after World War II. Truman thought it was a great idea. The UK was doing it, and Truman said, that's a great idea. But at the time, healthcare was run by the American Medical Association, which was a phenomenally conservative organization. There was no nationalized health care at all at the time, of course. There was no Medicare. This was, decades before Medicare. And so the opposition to that, that was, giving into communism when communism was the ultimate boogeyman, right? And so there was this huge political, against it. And Truman just got slaughtered for a lot of reasons, but for that, among others, in the next midterm election when he tried to push it through. And not only that, the budding health insurance industries saw this as a threat to their business model. You nationalize healthcare. The health insurance companies were just getting their start after World War II. And they'd sort of found their niche because, employer-sponsored health insurance was becoming a thing, and having employers give them all that money to insure these people was a more stable business model than selling insurance directly to customers. They suddenly liked this model better at the time, and they joined with the AMA and the pushback against it. Well, Kennedy tried it about 12 years later. Again, it got killed by the Senate. This time, you had none other than Ronald Reagan, championing the AMA and the health insurance companies to try to fight this. And by the time Medicare did get passed in 1966, and it only got passed because there were such overwhelming majorities of Democrats in Congress. I mean, you had like 2/3 of the Senate was Democrats in when it got passed in 65. That it was a far more watered down version of the original nationalized health care system that Truman tried to propose, and the UK had adapted. Now, Canada managed to do it in the early 70s, but I always argue Canada has fewer people than the state of California. They had far fewer people in the 70s, and so it was a little bit less complex. But basically, there's always been a pushback by those, who have all of the control of healthcare. Now, of course, the system has become so unbelievably opaque and so dysfunctional and disorganized, it's extreme. Plus, it's so remarkably complex. Keep in mind, healthcare now is many, many, many times more interconnected and complex than it was even 20 or 30 years ago. And this makes such a monumental change in how it's functioned and how it's financed even more complex than it would have been in the 70s or 80s, unfortunately. So as the problem has gotten more dysfunctional, it's also become more difficult to fix. That's one of the things that I deal with in the last chapter of my book. All of the challenges. You don't just have the pushback, you have the fact that
well, let me ask you this. Speaking of one of those challenges, I would make the case political, right? I mean, anything that we're trying to get accomplished, I think there's a movement aspect to it, because I do think our political system is dysfunctional, which kind of makes the healthcare system issue that much more pressing. So you have a situation where Nancy Pelosi just passed the bill. Basically, Nancy Pelosi had godlike powers to allow or disallow the items that she put into the bill. In this case, Nancy Pelosi ends up giving a giveaway to the health insurance companies by funding COBRA, as opposed to pushing through something like Medicare for all or Medicare for everyone with coronavirus. What are the things that take place behind the scenes specifically that incentivize their behavior to basically back a policy that is far, far less popular? I've said before, anybody that has used COBRA is not going to recommend COBRA. As opposed to a policy that has 80% approval or 88% approval, by Democrats, like Medicare for all. What are the corruption, or what's the glad handing that takes place specifically behind the scenes to incentivize their behavior to take an inferior policy?
I don't see how Nancy Pelosi has godlike powers. I mean, Mitch McConnell can prevent any, bill from even entering the Senate floor if he doesn't like it. And Donald Trump can veto it. So, I mean, Nancy Pelosi could put anything she wants into a House bill, and it may never see the light of day.
But that's my point. I mean, she put out a bill that's basically a showpiece. And within the context of that showpiece, she still didn't have Medicare for all. Meaning, Nancy Pelosi put out a bill that had no chance of ever going anywhere. It was just, this is what the Democratic Party stands for. And in making a bill like that, she explicitly made the choice to put in COBRA as opposed to Medicare for all. I guess I'm asking, what are the mechanics that incentivize somebody to do that versus something else? I mean, even Joe Biden. Joe Biden could support Medicare for all. He's chosen not to. He said he would even veto it. I guess I'm asking, if Medicare for all has 88% support, and from a schoolboy philosophy way that the way politicians get elected is by supporting a policy that is basically popular, something has to be going on behind the scenes that incentivizes the politicians to basically support one policy over another, even when the policy that they're supporting is inferior to the policy that they're not.
Well, it has to do with how the Senate works. I mean, it only takes 40 senators to block a bill, which means that as long as you don't have at least 60 senators in favor of a bill, it's never going to see the light of day, no matter how popular it is. I mean, that's been shown in study after study after study. Yes, our government is dysfunctional. It was set up basically by the founders to move slowly, very slowly. And unfortunately, that is how it works. I mean, currently we have a president that would have vetoed that anyway. So, you're saying, why doesn't Nancy Pelosi take over the country? I mean, it doesn't matter how popular something is. It's not going to happen if Mitch McConnell doesn't allow it to the Senate floor or if Donald Trump vetoes it.
Yeah, no, Dr. Belk, I hear what you're saying. Thank you again for joining us. Those out there, you're listening to Political Misfits on 105.5 FM here in the nation's capital. We're continuing our conversation with Dr. David Belk, the author of The Great American Healthcare Scam. Dr. Belk, I guess with the Pelosi thing, at least just from my point, is that if we're at a point of this great political envisioning or a great crisis point, this is the time where you'd want that Medicare for all policy rollout that maybe wasn't necessarily as simple as we're going to lower the age for Medicaid to 60, but simply have Nancy Pelosi fight for and at least genuflect and use the bully pulpit to put out these policies. Sure, obviously, I completely agree with you. Nothing goes anywhere when Mitch McConnell says it's dead on arrival, but right now is the time to at least use the bully pulpit to put policies out there. But at the same time, it doesn't seem like she's doing that. It doesn't seem like she's getting down to the core experience a lot of Americans are experiencing with healthcare that they want to hear. And I think what your book, that was so neat about your book, that it did such a great job, is that you actually looked at individual healthcare bills to actually get into the nitty gritty of what people experienced in the process. And I think this was what was so powerful with Bernie Sanders on the stump speech. He basically would just have people raise their hands and talk about how much their premiums were, what the deductibles were, and what they pay for on average when it comes to healthcare costs. Tell us a little bit more about what our listeners would be most surprised to hear if they themselves haven't experienced the healthcare system as intimately as so many millions of Americans have, and why it's so broken and what those costs eventually lead to.
Right. My book was far more to define the problem. And I guess that's really what I'm here about, is to say, this is what's going on in healthcare, and this is why you need to fight for reform. In other words, nobody's going to be able to solve this problem until they fully understand it. And a lot of people who think they understand it don't get a lot of the important details. And one of the most important details that people miss, well, two. Let's give you two. Most medical bills have nothing to do with the payments on those bills. Okay, so I start with chapter 1, where I show bills of as much as $95,000 for an hour of surgery only getting paid less than $5,000. Nobody pays a penny more than what the insurance agrees to. And, in the case of that first bill, you see a 95% discount on the amount billed. Now, the amount billed was completely insane, was for about an hour of surgery, and the amount paid could almost be argued as being somewhat generous. But the fact that there was such a huge discrepancy in the amount billed and the amount paid essentially gives consumer no idea how much a reasonable payment should have been. The next bill that I show is, on the very next page of the first chapter, shows an $86,000 bill and $13,000 is paid on it. And then I showed these two bills where, it's two patients of mine, both got hysterectomies at the same hospital, both have United Healthcare. One of them was day surgery. She went home the same day. The other was 3 days in the hospital. And the hospital bills twice as much for the 3-day hospitalization, which you would expect, but the insurance company agrees to twice the payment for the day surgery, which makes no sense at all. In other words, billing charges on a hospital bill, very little to do with the expected payment. The payment for those bills have not only very little to do with the billing charges, they don't even seem to have a whole lot to do with the medical services provided. In other words, we have a system of billing and payments that are so disconnected and so chaotic that you can't predict from the billing charges what a payment ought to be. And this fills the entire system with this huge cloud of uncertainty and confusion.
And Dr. Belk, I'm just to ask you a quick question to clarify there. That confusion, is it just a system and process of an outgrowth of a greedy, inefficient system, or the insurance companies basically said, let's confuse the hell out of them because they'll never actually be able to figure out what's going on. We'll have all sorts of subclauses. That way they'll never be able to actually challenge us on these charges.
I write an entire chapter describing how all of this evolved from the 1970s until now. It started as hospitals adapting to changing systems and how payments were made, and adapting, and you could say misadapting, morphed into a system where the insurance companies, with the help of the hospitals, decided to take advantage of the confusion and accelerate it. So you could say it started out as an adaptation and turned into a scam. That would be the best way. And, all of chapter, 5 and 6 describe, in my book, describe how this came to be. Very few this elaborate start out as, someone planning to make this happen, because it seems unlikely that anyone would be that imaginative, going forth. But a lot of the time they simply take advantage of a situation where there's a lot of darkness, there's a lot of confusion, and they say, hey, we can make money out of this, and then suddenly they encourage it to grow.
Yeah. Right? I also wanted to ask you, Dr. Belk, I believe you're in Alameda, California. Is that correct?
Yes, that is.
Yeah, well, I wanted to ask you, we talk about people trying to take advantage of the moment. That is where Elon Musk's Tesla plant is located. And it seemed like California officials in that county had worked out an agreement with Musk to reopen the plant for workers to go back to work. And I'm really curious here in the moment of coronavirus and the vast complexity and confusion of the process, whether or not your healthcare costs are going to be waived if you do get sick, if you go to work at Elon Musk's factory right now, who has their own sub agreement with the county. It just seems like if we're already dealing with a system with incredible complexity and confusion, that now in this moment with individual people and billionaires like Musk and others making their own side agreements with government, with their workers basically bearing the brunt of the pandemic, as we've seen also at meat packing factories across the country, how much more confusing is it going to get as we move forward? And how many millions of Americans are going to deal with just complexities of a healthcare system in this corona pandemic that they've never seen before?
I actually don't know the answer to that question. I mean, coronavirus, of course, is new for all of us. And so, it'd be like asking me to predict, how many hurricanes we're going to have this hurricane season. It's definitely, a mess. But exactly, how it's going to all pan out. But my understanding is Elon Musk said, I'm opening my factory, dare to stop me. And, it's one of those standoffs where they basically didn't stop him, I guess, or at least that's how it's playing out so far. But again, we'll see how it all plays out. And of course, I would assume, I know nothing about Tesla other than see the cars around. I would assume that Elon Musk is supplying them health insurance, and he's paying for it out of his own pocket, which means it's going to be his costs, of course. If you read my chapter on employer-sponsored, administrative service contracts, I'm very specific about the fact that employers now have been talked into self-insuring, meaning that most large companies not only provide the health insurance, they pay for all of the medical costs out of their own expenses. So whatever trouble Elon Musk gets into with this, I guess he's going to pay for it himself.
Dr. Belk, I do have a question concerning the issue of how the complexity of this, complexity of the system, maybe it's correct, but what are in your book, you mentioned collusion and kickbacks. What are the collusion and kickbacks that are part of the system that make it this inefficient?
Okay, so let's talk about medication prices. And I'll ask you guys two questions that, I usually ask people when going into the prescription drugs. First question, yes or no, are all prescription drugs in the United States really expensive?
Well, no.
Good, no, exactly. Second question, are most prescription drugs in the United States really expensive?
No.
Good. All right, you must have read my book. Yeah.
Well, I mean, when you're abroad, they have the same medication for dirt cheap. For example, in Egypt, you can get Lyrica over the counter for a few bucks. Back in the United States, the insurance company will try to push you away from it because it's so expensive. I mean, the moment that you're buying medication abroad, you get to see the actual price versus what we pay in the United States. It's atrociously high here, like shockingly high in comparison to elsewhere.
Oh, here's what I'm trying to say. In the United States, most prescription medications are not very expensive, but will pay more than they ought to, not because of the pharmaceutical companies, but because of the way we purchase medications. And the very, very first example I write in my introduction is, of this patient of mine, Patricia Bernstein, who walks into a Walgreens with a prescription for a migraine medication. They tell her, well, your insurance won't cover it. It's $1,500 if you pay for it yourself. I get the insurance to agree to cover it. They say, oh, well, it's $168, but you can only buy, 10 pills at that price. She walks down to Costco, says she doesn't have insurance, and pays a cash price of $40 for 40 pills. $1 a pill versus $37 a pill that she was quoted at Walgreens, okay? What I'm saying is she didn't go to Canada. She went to Costco, said she didn't have insurance, and her pills cost her, 1/37th the price. Okay? 87% of prescriptions filled in the United States are for generic medications. And the vast majority of generic medications cost pharmacies pennies per dose. Okay? Meaning that if you don't use your insurance and you go to Costco or you go to Kroger's or someplace like that, you can buy 3 months or a year's supply of generic medications for pennies a pill. Literally, often people get a year's supply of their blood pressure medication for $20. Not in Canada, at Safeway. They get a year's supply of their cholesterol medication for, $35. Okay? And the truth is, right, you want to talk collusion. The entities in charge, when you have insurance and you have insurance coverage, prescription drug coverage, okay, the entities in charge of what medications you buy, and how much you pay at the counter is what's called your pharmacy benefit manager, all right? They work for the insurance company, all right? They determine which medications are covered under your plan and how much you'll pay in a copay, right? And whether it's tier 1, tier 2, or whatever. Okay. So 87% of the prescriptions we fill are generic, and most generic medications cost pharmacies pennies per pill. I keep saying that so that you'll remember it, all right? But you go in and you buy a month's supply of, your doctor prescribes you a month's supply of the blood pressure medication lisinopril, all right? Commonly prescribed blood pressure medication, and you pay $10 for it, thinking you've got a good deal paying $10 for 30 pills. Well, the pharmacy paid 1.2 cents per pill for that lisinopril, right? Meaning you just bought 40 cents worth of pills for $10, right? Your pharmacy benefit manager, which said, hey, lisinopril's on your list, it's only a $10 copay, they split that copay with the pharmacy. Meaning not only did you overpay for those pills, the entity who determined your overpayment gets a cut of that copay. It's called clawback. 23% of all prescriptions filled in the United States, not only do you overpay for the prescription at the pharmacy, the entity that determines how much you pay of your insurance company gets a cut of that copay, right? So they choose that copay and then they take from it. So not only do you pay premiums to cover medications that don't cost anything, you overpay and then there's a kickback to a pharmacy benefit manager. 3 biggest pharmacy benefit managers, the main pharmacy benefit managers are Caremark, a branch of CVS Caremark, OptumRx, a branch of United Health Group, and Express Scripts, which used to be an entity on their own before Cigna bought them, right? So the pharmacy benefit manager ensures that you overpay for your generic prescriptions, or at least, your copay pretty much covers the cost, not more, for the generic prescription. Now, you can go to GoodRx online, click in lisinopril 20 milligrams, and play with it a little bit. Find you can get 365 pills for $20. That's 1 pill a day for a year for $20, right? Okay. Generic Viagra, right? Everyone's like, oh, you can get generic Viagra for $5 now. Well, you can get 100 generic Viagra for $30 at Costco.
Yeah.
They're not.
No, it's pretty incredible stuff there. My jaws just dropped listening to you explain it, and just think about so many seniors here in my own community that struggle with affording healthcare. I mean, it's not just your average person. These are people that are sick that desperately need the prescription drugs, and they're people that just simply can't afford it. It's just a horrific story all around. So big thank you there, Dr. David Belk, for putting out your book. I think to expose the problem is the first best way to tackle the problem. The book is called The Great American Healthcare Scam: How Kickbacks, Collusion, and Propaganda Have Exploded Healthcare Cost in the United States. Dr. Belk, where can people find your book and more of your work online?
Well, right now it's available on Amazon. You know, I self-published it, so you know they were the one medium that could get it out there for me, and so you can buy the paperback for like $14.95 or the Kindle for like $9.99. But you know, going back to medications, right? And you know, a couple of other important details. Well, I tell you that most generics are very expensive, are very inexpensive, pennies a dose, right? And that's 7 out of 8 prescriptions filled in this country. Another thing people need to understand, the brand name version of those exact same medications are not 2 to 3 times the price of the generics. Most people say, you know, okay, you can get a year's supply of amlodipine for $20. How much does the brand name Norvasc cost? And we'll say, well, $50, $60, $100, right? No. Brand name version of any prescription drug out there isn't 2 or 3 times the price. It's roughly 100 times the price of the generic equivalent. Okay? So brand name Norvasc. Now, you can get the generic amlodipine for $20 a year. The brand name Norvasc is going to cost you $1,500. All right. You can get generic Viagra. You can get 30 pills for $15. The brand name is going to cost you $5,000. Right. Lipitor, the generic atorvastatin is going to cost you $40 for a year's supply. The brand name version would cost you $1,400 for just 100 pills. Right. Okay. So what that means is that if you're getting prescriptions for generic pills and they're all generic, you're wasting your time if you use your insurance to buy it. But if you need a brand name medication because there's no generic equivalent, you know, if you have cancer, if you need insulin, if you need, you know, a lot of the asthma inhalers, whatever, you're forking out a lot of money, 100 times what you would pay for the generic. Okay, now why is that? Well, part of it's the pharmaceutical companies. Yes, they're greedy. Yes, they're making lots of profits. I have a whole thing on that. But what people don't understand is that these entities, the pharmacy benefit managers, which no one is talking about, but everyone should, they get rebates from the pharmaceutical companies of up to 40% of the cost of the medication to cover your medication for you. So.
Yeah. Dr. Belk, we got to leave it there. Unfortunately, we are out of time here, but let's let people get to your book. I think we left a good cliffhanger, The Great American Healthcare Scam. It's brand new, out in March. You can get that on Amazon, The Great American Healthcare Scam, How Kickbacks, Collusion, and Propaganda Have Exploded Healthcare Costs in the United States. I think we absolutely will need to have you back on in the future to continue to break this down. So much news there. Dr. Belk, thank you again. With that, we do need to turn to a quick break here. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
This is Dominic Carter, a political reporter in New York for Verizon Fios CB News.
This is Dr. Bill Honigman of Progressive Democrats of America, PDAmerica.org.
Hey, everybody, my name is Tim Black of The Tim Black Show. This is Tom Luongo of Gold Coast and Guns.
Hello, this is Benny Johnson.
Hi, this is Juanita Broderick, author of You'd Better Put Some Ice on That.
This is Jamal Thomas from the Progressive Soapbox.
Hey, this is Raheem from D.C.
This is Rachel Blevins, a correspondent with RT America, and you're listening to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
When I'm waking up in the morning and I'm looking for what's on the queue for the day, I tune to Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
The wokest radio show for your wokest AM.
These guys are the best in the business and experts when it comes to policy.
They're bringing you the top headlines with an angle that you won't see in the mainstream media.
Fault Lines is the greatest show on the radio. I enjoy immensely talking with Lee and Garland. They always treat me from either side with due respect, and it's a wonderful conversation.
The best morning news show in America. Fault Lines with Nixon and Stranahan.
Lee and Garland speak truth to power from the depths of the swamp itself, right here on Radio Sputnik.
Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here, kind of, sort of, with Jamarl Thomas. We are back here on Monday, May 18th, the brand new week of Political Misfits. Give us a call, 202-521-1320. A lot to talk about over the next hour and 10 minutes. We're with you here until 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Right now, the World Health Assembly is gathering. That is the organizing body of the World Health Organization. And at the event, Chinese President Xi Jinping addressed the WHO's decision-making body, as I mentioned, the World Health Assembly, voicing support for an international evaluation of the COVID-19 response, and pledged to give $2 billion to the WHO for COVID responses over the next 2 years, and promising to make any vaccines it develops publicly available. Xi, speaking at the assembly, said China supports a comprehensive evaluation of the global response to the epidemic after the global epidemic is under control, to sum up experiences and remedy deficiencies. Xi went on to say this work needs a scientific and professional attitude and needs to be led by the WHO, and the principles of objectivity and fairness need to be upheld. China stated last month that it opposed any politicized inquiry into the pandemic that presumes China's guilt. But according to the Washington Post, international support for an inquiry expanded to include Russia, Turkey, and more European and African states. And as drafts of the proposed resolution to launch the investigation focus on international collaboration to manage the pandemic, with relatively limited emphasis on questioning its source, Beijing seems to have relaxed. The head of the WHO at the same meeting said the organization welcomed calls for an impartial, independent, and comprehensive evaluation that takes into account the entirety of the response by all actors responding to the pandemic. At the same meeting, Taiwan, I guess not at the meeting, but basically backed off their demand that they're included as an observer member of the World Health Assembly. It seemed like that they were going to push pretty hard for this, given that they've had a pretty good response there, Jamarl, in Taiwan. Nearly population of 24 million has only had 404 confirmed COVID-19 cases and 7 deaths. So something happened along the way there to block Taiwan from becoming an observer member. Obviously, China not wanting them to be a member. They were members from 2009 to 2016. So I assume there was some horse trading, increased pressure, Jamara, but it seems like China, not during the pandemic, are going to give access to the world to come in and look around and see where the virus may have come for, but they are committing now that once the pandemic has ceased, then they'll be more than open for a full investigation. I guess that's what you do. I guess I can't speak too far in depth of when the investigation would start. You'd think it would start immediately, but nonetheless, it seems like the world community has found some agreement here, which I'm not going to disregard too much.
So I have mixed feelings on this, and I don't necessarily know what's right or wrong. And I think this is one of those cases where there is no right or wrong. It's basically states acting in their own best interests. China is going to see to the integrity of China, regardless of what the other countries say. China also knows at this point there's been a huge heaping of politicization. You said that poorly, but you know what I mean, in regards to this particular virus.
Some politics, some old politicking.
The politicking, right. That politicization. God, Jesus. But you know what I mean. Basically, how we have regarded China and this particular virus, and we've used this virus as an attack point, Joe Biden and Donald Trump, in regards to the politics of the United States. I'm curious on whether or not, and you can answer this, Bob, do you think if roles were reversed and we had a virus that started here in the United States, and you had 120 countries.
No.
You think the United States would say, yeah, kick rocks. And that's the catch, right? I mean, like, if the United States would turn around and say kick rocks to something like that, how can I, wag a finger at China for not doing something similar? Like, I guess that's why I asked that question. I'm unclear on how countries, especially nations, respond. And I have a hard time believing.
I'm pretty sure we were to just blame terrorists for sneaking into the country.
You don't even think we'd own up to it? You think it'd just be like, yeah, that didn't happen here.
No, of course not. And then Donald Trump would have done what he did on Friday night, fire every inspector general who was looking into the matter at hand, Jamar, which segues us perfectly into the late night firing on Friday after we went off air for the weekend of the State Department Secretary General Steve Linick, the Inspector General who leads hundreds of employees in investigating fraud and waste at the State Department, had begun an inquiry into Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State's possible misuse of a political appointee to perform personal tasks for him and his wife, according to aides. That included walking the dog, picking up dry cleaning, and making restaurant reservations and echoed whistleblower complaints from last year. Mr. Linick is the fourth inspector general to fall in a purge this spring by Mr. Trump of officials he has deemed insufficiently loyal. And remember, inspector generals are supposed to be independent watchdogs, so not a position that loyalty should factor into. But the alleged investigation into Pompeo shined a spotlight on his frequent trips to Kansas, where many thought Pompeo would run for Senate. Many geography nerds tomorrow have pointed out that Kansas is in the United States and not the best place for America's leading foreign diplomat to spend much of their time. Another spotlight seems to also be turned on Pompeo's wife. Back in January, unnamed diplomats complained about Pompeo's wife, Susan, traveling with him across the Middle East during a partial government shutdown. Brett Brune, a former career diplomat and director of global engagement on President Obama's National Security Council, said of Pompeo's wife, quote, "She has this quasi-official role where my friends are called to meetings she is leading at the department. They know that's not supposed to happen because she isn't in their chain of command, but what can they do?" Jamal, wow. I guess, yeah, wow. I hope the investigation continues. This was a little hard for me because if I'm flying around in a sweet plane and visiting the world, I'm probably going to take my wife with me. But the rest of it seems pretty awful and corrupt, and it just seems lazy. Like, pay folks to take care of your dog and get your clothes. People have personal assistants to help with non-professional work. So the firing seems ridiculous. Obviously, Donald Trump has no problem with the spectacle, or at least the look of firing inspector generals. I guess it doesn't blow back on him. Nobody cares about accountability anymore. I'm curious what you make of this story.
I don't think anybody cares about accountability. I think every Republican, most, I've seen one Republican say, yeah, this looks a little dicey. But we're in an election season. I don't necessarily think they're going to really make hay out of it, especially from the standpoint of his own party, because at the end of the day, they want to win. And making hay out of a government corruption thing is not necessarily the way to do it. You're right. This is just lazy. I mean, basically, Pompeo has all the money that he needs in order to pay for people to take his dog out and all this other stuff. You don't have to use your assistants for this. And then turning around and firing the IG that's investigating you. The IG wasn't going to lock you up. You know what I mean? Like, you might get wrapped on the knuckles. It's not something where you're going to prison over. And you're firing the guy. Yeah, I mean, it's just lazy a way of going it. But I don't think there's going to be consequences. So, maybe it's not lazy at all if there's no consequences for it.
Yeah, I mean, Scott Pruitt did get fired. We were laughing about the former EPA director he was beyond the pale with much of what he was doing, purchasing like mattresses from Trump hotels, just bizarre, like weird, bizarre stuff. Pompeo stuff seems pretty in line. I mean, it's kind of interesting looking at the net worth of Mike Pompeo. Here's on the internet tells me it's around $350,000. Obviously, speaking fees and his government salary increased there as he moved over to a cabinet level position. But it's interesting, Jamal, how you think of somebody like Elizabeth Warren, who's worth $12 million, and the broad range of net worth of these different career politicians, that some are worth millions and tens of millions of dollars, and some have hundreds of thousands of dollars in their bank, which is still a lot. Yeah. But at the same time, it is quite interesting that you have a diversity of wealthy people in government, which means whatever. I just get fascinated. I thought he'd be worth a lot more.
Well, it does mean a lot. I mean, I have to believe Pompeo is worth more than that. But okay, fair enough. But I would say it does matter a lot. I mean, think about your life and think about the people who you interact with in the context of your life, the people who you try to help, the people who need a house, those people give you a certain focal point in the way that you operate in the world. It's hard to deal with people in those terms and then turn away from their suffering, their pain, especially if you have the capacity to help. Well, if you have $100 million in the bank, you're not talking to those people. I mean, it's like your world is different. You're on different planes. You might be on private jets. The places you eat at, the places you stay at, you're in a different world. And those are the people who are basically making policy, the people who are fundamentally in a different world than the people who they're making policy for. If you want to know why there's a vast disparity between what the public wants versus what media and what the political class make, it's an issue of class. All of these people are just in a different class.
Yeah, but I think it'd just be weird again to be at the cabinet table. You have like Secretary of Education Betsy DeVos. She's a billionaire. You have Wilbur Ross with $500 million, and then you have
Nancy
a
Pelosi,
non-millionaire Pompeo. Pompeo's just a non-millionaire. Sorry, buddy, you're out and excluded at the cabinet millionaire luncheon. Anyways, Jamal, with that, we are at the end of our first hour, but don't worry, we have a jam-packed second hour of news, politics, and culture for you. In the second hour, we will take a look at the spike in COVID-19 cases in Texas, the U.S. government stockpiling riot gear. And it's Monday, which means our weekly Miss the Press segment where we lampoon America's Sunday morning political talk shows. That and much more. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, live in D.C. We're back after this.
Listening to Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Welcome back to the Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here with Jamarl Thomas. We enter here our second hour of the show. We're with you daily from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hang on to Radio Sputnik the rest of the day. Great programming here on Monday, May 18th. We have By Any Means Necessary after us, followed by Loud and Clear, and then the critical hour. That is at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So for the next 6 hours here, brand new programming you can stay tuned into. Let's continue to go against the grain. Lots to cover over the next hour, including Joe Biden's lack of outreach strategy to Latino voters and the federal government purchasing riot gear to get ahead of any civil unrest over the COVID-19 pandemic. But we start in the state of Texas. Texas reported over the weekend 1,801 new coronavirus cases, reportedly marking the state's largest single-day jump since the start of the coronavirus crisis. To date, Texas has reported nearly 47,000 COVID-19 cases in total. There were 33 additional deaths reported Saturday, bringing the total number of fatalities in the Lone Star State to 1,305. The Texas Department of State Health Services said 734 of the new cases are from Potter and Randall counties. These counties' new cases are largely from targeting testing of employees at meat plants in the area. More test results from the plant are expected. This latest jump in COVID-19 cases comes while Texas is moving forward with plans to reopen. Yes, you heard that right. The largest spike in cases leads to Texas moving to reopen. On Monday, gyms can open with 25% capacity. Non-essential manufacturing and work offices can reopen as well with 25% capacity. Here to talk about this and much more is one of our favorite Texans, Brianna Griffith, the producer and host of the show People's Republic. Brianna, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. Glad to be the Texas whisperer once again.
Well, help us make sense of this. Texas is playing the nothing to see here card back to our normal lives. But Brianna, this doesn't feel that surprising. At the same time, it seems kind of like the playbook for America. Workers suffering, no big deal. Poor folks dying, it's all right. We'll send them some food. Black and brown people disproportionately affected. Well, of course, it's America. This whole story, and that yet the reopening of Texas feels as American as apple pie.
One of the things I would say about Texas and the way the state government handles things here is if you want to know what any given state governor would do if they could get away with anything, if you want to know what basically the capitalist class of the U.S. could do if they could get away with anything, look at Texas, which is usually used as sort of a test ground for what basically, again, the capitalist class can get away with. It really is hard to make sense of this any other way than just for hatred of the working class, especially black and brown people who are most vulnerable. Because, we were warning against this here from the very beginning, and yet it was basically pushed through at the state level. Actually, the interesting thing is that today was sort of the initial date set to up that from 25% capacity to capacity. Today, it was at least initially scheduled to be the starting point of that, but since we're seeing an obvious rise in the number of deaths, as you talked about, who knows what's going to happen with that? Who knows if they're just going to push it through anyway and just push the date back a little bit, or if this is actually going to, force cases to reclose somewhere in the near future. Like, it's hard to tell exactly what's going to happen, but it's clear that like this was pushed through with absolute reckless disregard for people's well-being, and the exact result that everybody expected is coming to fruition.
Yeah, and it's going to be really interesting too when cases start to break out, or that there's spikes or led back to like a single restaurant or a single church, and basically these churches and restaurants are going to continue to be shamed and dragged through the mud. It was interesting. I went camping this weekend, and I was at a man's site who has 100 acres basically, and people can camp throughout. And people wanted to do big gatherings out there because they said, we'll do social distance. And he said, absolutely not, because if an outbreak happens here at my location, then everybody forever will remember I was the guy that opened too quickly. And so you have all these businesses rush to reopen because they need to basically get paid as well. And you have government saying that we're no longer going to pay unemployment checks if you don't go back to work, and people are going to rush back to work. You're going to destroy people's lives, businesses, well-being, reputations. So much is going to unfold over the next few weeks. But Jamaro, so much of this, for me, it just highlights the sadistic nature of so many of these Republicans. And we played the clip there of Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick from the state of Texas weeks ago talking about the need to sacrifice life in order to save the economy. And he knew exactly what he was saying when he was saying sacrifice life. He wasn't saying I'm going to go out and put my head underneath the guillotine. He knew those who were sacrificing their lives were going to be low income workers. It was going to be seniors in poor living standards. It was going to be prisoners, and it was going to be black and brown people in rural and urban communities. They knew exactly whose lives they were going to sacrifice at the expense of now reopening the economy.
Yeah, that's why I made the argument early on. I think it was several weeks ago that basically part and parcel to the reason that Donald Trump was willing to open the economy is because a disproportionate number of people who were dying were people of color, and that number was only going to go up as they pushed to open the economy. He's believing, I think to some degree, that his base won't necessarily hold him responsible for it, because his base, a disproportionate number of them, care more about economics than they do about human life. It is a weird disparity that we're seeing in regards to Republicans and Democrats in the way that we're viewing this particular virus. It's almost we're living in two worlds. Brianna, I'm curious, what allows your government to get away with this? Because this is horrendous. I mean, basically, we're seeing an outbreak at the exact moment that they're saying, let's open it up. And the only excuse that you can really have for saying open up the economy is, look, we just want the owner class to basically start making money again. That owner class is not going to have their heads under the guillotine, as Bob said. So yeah, we want to open this up. Let's get this going. How do they not pay for that? A large contingent of Texas is a Hispanic population. Do that population take issue with the fact that they're going to be on the front lines of the people who are going to be getting the most ill?
I mean, certainly for that last question, like, do people take issue with it? Yeah, sure. Most people I've talked to and most people I know just generally not want this at all. They don't want to open up. I was talking to somebody recently who was saying, like, I don't want to go back to work. I want to be safe. And that, I think, is the general sentiment. Is like, whatever people need to do to be safe right now, and to be able to just have a roof over their heads until this thing passes is what most people want. But it's not really about public opinion, because, like, we see this over and over again, that the Texas state level government doesn't feel the need to supply their actions because there's voter disenfranchisement. Really, like, the government only represents a very, very small of the population. As long as they're satisfying that portion of the population, that 1% of the population, they don't really care about public opinion. They don't really care about, obviously well-being. And so we're seeing also this kind of clash right now between a marginally or somewhat more progressive city, governments such as Austin, who are trying, within the best of their purview, to respond to this state-level basic attack on the rights and the safety of people here. And again, the state government doesn't answer to anybody. The state government is such like heavy disenfranchisement of Latinx people that they don't really feel the pressure very often as far as when it it's like they're not worried about getting reelected. Yeah. they have that in the bag often.
Yeah, give us a call 202-521-1320 if you have anything to say about Texas reopening. Maybe your state has been closed or is slowly reopening as well. We'd love to hear from you here on Political Misfits, 202-521-1320. And the other reason that these governments continue to act like they do, Jamarl Thomas, is because they have all of the weapons to protect them and protect their interest and their property. There was a story over the weekend from Lee Fang in The Intercept reporting that the federal government has ramped up security and police-related spending in response to the coronavirus pandemic. The purchase orders include requests for disposable cuffs, gas masks, ballistic helmets, and riot gloves, along with law enforcement protective equipment for federal police assigned to protect veteran affairs facilities. The orders were expedited under a special authorization, quote, in response to COVID-19 outbreak. So the time of COVID-19, everything is expedited. Redcon Solutions Group, a private security company founded by Iraq war veterans, has won over $1.6 million in contracts to provide guards for COVID-19 screening security guard services. Similar contracts have gone out to private security firms to guard VA facilities in San Francisco, Des Moines, and Fayetteville, among others. The CARES Act, as you all remember there, the $2.2 trillion stimulus legislation passed in late March, also authorized $850 million for the Coronavirus Emergency Supplemental Funding Program, a federal grant program to prepare law enforcement, correctional officers, and police for the crisis. Brianna, people going unemployed and a pandemic ripping through oppressed communities, you know what we should do? Let's purchase a bunch of riot gear.
Yeah, I mean, I think it really shows in many ways that sort of the powers that be are preparing for essentially massive dissent, like which we haven't seen. I'm surprised to see, specifically within this report, the VA militarizing so much. But I guess that's the way so much of the country is. I mean, looking at this, the fact that the VA we started arming in 2011 when the Pentagon began providing so much military equipment. I mean, this has been sort of just the latest iteration of kind of a larger trend in U.S. society since the so-called global war on terror, of essentially the militarization of all of society. And it's basically like it's the intensification of the class war that we've kind of been talking about. It's the preparation by those who know level of protest that's coming to prepare to try and repress those even more kind of violently than we've already seen. It's disturbing, but I think people need to be aware of be aware of what kind of preparation is being made, because like they know that there is essentially this kind of class war going on. The Pentagon knows kind of what the class dynamics there are. So like the working, those of us who are of the working class, those of us who are of the oppressed classes need to understand that as well.
Yeah, it's interesting the role the media plays in all of this too, Jamarl, of what protests they focus on. And obviously a lot of people, the kind of pro-Trumpers, let liberation ring in the country, open us back up, get all of this media attention. But at the same time, their butt may be 20 to a few hundred people at these protests. There was one here in Washington, D.C. they were laughing at because the protest had 9 people. So according to social distancing rules that said you couldn't gather more than 10 people in a given location, they were actually more than fine to be gathering here at Freedom Square in downtown Washington, D.C. But all of this focus on like these pro-Trump people, but there is no focus on some of these larger protests, the rent strike protest or the workers protest. Those are the ones that like the media and the ruling class are most terrified for, but they yet instead give extra coverage to the tiny protests that aren't going to ever gain any traction and try to deflect from the much larger, I think, uprising that's going to come over the next year as we continue to see the fallout from the pandemic.
I read an article recently that said 800,000 people were going to be homeless potentially after the pandemic. All of these people that lost their jobs, all of these people not able to get access to unemployment, what are they going to do? And you have the majority of the population living paycheck to paycheck, and that's before all of this hit. The majority with basically $500 in the bank and many with none, basically dealing with an emergency, which is basically what this is if you are out of work or if you are one of these people who have their hours cut. There was another stat that said 42 million jobs are not coming back. 42% of the jobs aren't coming back. So these are astonishing numbers. Now the question becomes, what does the public do when it deals with these numbers. And I would make the point that it's a rational act to boost up on security because you are going to need it. I mean, honestly, if we're going the way that we're going to go, where they're trying to force people back to work in situations that those people know are ill, for Texas, for example, or even to some degree, New York, or some of these heartland places that have started to see an increase in COVID-19. Well, those people, A, are not going to want to go to work. B, you're going to have a large number of people that are going to be very angry at their lot in this country at this point. And with all of these protests that are taking place, like you say, they don't focus on those protests, but those rent protests are going on. Supposedly, we're going to have job protests that are taking place each month. They know what they're doing, right, Brianna? I mean, this is basically them expecting, we know something may take place, some kind of spark may cut off because of the destabilization of this particular pandemic. And we need to take measures in order to deal with that. That's basically what this is, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think those people who are interested in like the social and economic justice and who are organizing around that need to be anticipating this with the same level of sort of discipline and the same level of really hard-hitting analysis. Basically, again, like the ruling class, the Pentagon, and sort of capitalist state are sort of anticipating right now. Like we need to be as prepared or more prepared as like Pentagon and whatnot, as far as like understanding, again, like sort of what's to expect out of this. And I think a good example of that, as you said, were the kind of protests around like a demand to cancel the rent right now. These the cancel the rents. You can find information on that on canceltherents.org, and sort of the idea is to be sort of making these counter demands, not like use this as an attempt to sort of scale back what we think is possible, but really to expand what it is we demand out of a society. The society itself is not sort of sustainable under the kind of neoliberal model that we've seen up through this period. We need to demand like sort of a better society out of that we need to be prepared to fight for that, whatever struggle, whatever sort of engaging in struggle that might mean. We need to have that same level of preparation.
Yeah, and the stuff that's terrifying to it too is to know that both of the main political parties here in the United States are completely in unison when it comes to oppressing movements and workers' rights in this country. And if anything was learned from Russiagate over the last 3 months of everything that led up to it being exposed, was that the Democratic Party does not care about civil liberties. They're more than happy to abuse the FISA courts. They were more than happy to unmask U.S. citizens when they were talking to foreign citizens, and they're more than happy to support the FBI and whatever the FBI says, as long as it's in the interest of the American people. So you're going to continue to see government overreach and repression, and you have no party to turn to because the Democrat and the Republican Party are completely in collusion in that process. And all of the liberals who were so adamant about Russiagate have completely overlooked all of this new evidence to realize that their heroes are not heroes, but they're just people that are going to oppress workers who are demanding their rights. Brianna Griffith, I want to pivot a little bit here, but continue to talk about domestic politics. I want to look more at the future of Joe Biden and his efforts to become the 46th president of the United States. There was an article out here in Politico talking about Joe Biden's struggle amongst Latino voters. In the article, it interviewed more than 20 Latino political operatives, lawmakers, and activists who said they don't see a game plan from Biden to marshal Hispanic voters effectively in the fall. Those interviewed said there's little evidence the campaign is devoted to resources or hiring the staff to get out the vote. The article went on to read that the campaign's disconnect with Latinos appears to be based more on the lack of execution than on policy. Cash-strapped coming out of the primary and hemmed in by the coronavirus, its efforts to reach Latino voters has been lackluster, critics in the community say. The fact that Latinos weren't central to Biden's primary strategy has meant the campaign has ground to make up. Yeah, that's saying the least. Brianna, Latinos are on track to be the largest non-white voting bloc in November, with 32 million expected to be eligible to vote. 2/3 of those eligible Latino voters live in just 5 states, including Florida, Arizona, and Texas. Former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson said Biden's campaign has demonstrated, quote, little or no activity in the Hispanic community. The objective isn't to win the Hispanic vote. Biden will do that, but to keep it above 65% and to maximize Latino turnout. Right. If we go to 58 or 57% with Hispanics, we're in trouble. Brianna, I thought the line that was most illuminated in this article was the problem being more about the lack of execution than on policy. It seems like liberals and Democrats are pretty good at coming up with good sounding policies, the whole human rights, social safety nets, equity, equality, blah, 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 blah. But when you have no actual relationship with communities, specifically in the Latino community, those policies get lost in either when nobody knows how to market them or connect them to people's personal experiences. And it seems like Joe Biden from his basement in Delaware somehow thinks he's going to have a personal connection with a community, in part that he, say, soured relationships with, would be one way to say it, while he was Obama's vice president.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, well, I think that framing of lack of execution versus a policy issue, lack of execution is a policy. If you have a quote-unquote policy in place, you decide not to sort of execute a plan of outreach or whatnot, or whatever the case is, that lack of execution, that sort of apathy toward this or that thing, that is, in certain ways can be seen as a policy. It's a policy of negligence on the part of the Biden campaign. I was astonished that that's sort of the bar line when you brought up the 65% number that they're trying for. If we go to 58 or 57%, with Hispanics, we're in trouble, is the quote there. And that's just, I mean, that's like, it should not be a hard sell for anyone but Donald Trump. When Donald Trump is the bar line for like awful policies, for people to still be worried about like Latinx people not wanting to vote for someone as genuinely awful as Biden, like it's just incredible how far the bar has lowered here. I think it's really sort of an intentional apathy, I think, on the Biden camp, because like the Biden camp is not, like the Biden camp doesn't have the same, I think, sort of intensity of defeating these draconian, racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, and all the other bigoted policies. Like the Democratic Party doesn't have that same sort of like fire about like sort of trying to defeat those policies and bring about sort of social and economic justice. I think sort of the more grassroots organizers, independent organizers have, because, again, they've already, as we've talked about before, they've already defeated what they consider to be the main threat to themselves, which is Sanders. Now that they defeated Sanders, I can see why they would just sort of completely drop the ball on trying to reach out like such large Latinx. And
a big part of it is exciting people to go out and vote. And as you mentioned there, Bill Richardson, the former governor of New Mexico, saying that we have to win 65 or above percentage. There are a lot of Hispanic and Latino voters that vote because of their conservative values. They're against abortion, and that they're single issue voters often. Those people are very committed to that single issue, will go out there and campaign. And so if Biden, it's not enough just to hold the line, Jamar. Biden actually has to give people something to be excited about to go out there and vote for him.
Well, Jeff Weaver has put out a thing saying basically that Joe Biden is losing lefties. Now, when he's making that argument that he's losing lefties, a lot of these people that Sanders were getting were what? Kids, 34 and under. I'm old enough to call 34 kids. Ish, not so much. But you know what I mean. Basically, the younger generation was the generation that Sanders was getting. Now, why was he getting these people? Policy. It wasn't magic. It wasn't something that Sanders was doing magic tricks and it was like, wow, I just love that guy. No, it was policy. He would say things and they would say, that materially helps me in my life. I'm going to support that guy. Here's the catch. 60% or over 60% of Hispanics are under 34. Did you know that? I was blown away by that number. And which means that a large majority of the people that Joe Biden need to get are basically in the age range that Sanders was getting at 70%. If Joe Biden wants to get these people, it's a straightforward path. But Brianna, tell me if I'm wrong. The issue that these guys are having is not how to get this demographic. It's how to get this demographic without giving any concessions to this demographic to get this demographic. And I have to be honest, Democrats need to explain to me in basic terms, if Donald Trump really is the apocalypse, how do you really make an argument to me that concessions matter more than beating Trump? Meaning, if you can support Medicare for all, an expansion of college, getting rid of student loans, and that wins you the election, how can you really justify, and I'll ask you, Brianna, how can they really justify not supporting those policies if that's the thing that it takes to beat Trump? I don't understand it.
Because I think ultimately they're still relying on Stockholm Syndrome. They're still relying on them being sort of the only game in town, the only quote-unquote legitimate game in town, though I think they're willing to cash in a lot of their legitimacy, a lot of their political capital in order to push someone like Biden through. And yeah, you're right. It's all, they're not really, like, they see it in terms of sort of capturing the vote rather than in terms of kind of winning people over to the side. They see it in terms of like that's entire angle of getting someone to pull the lever on making the least amount of actual concessions, even rhetorical concessions, you don't have to act on. Like it's all just sort of a marketing game. And people at this point, I think more and more people are seeing through the marketing game, because it's hard to sell people. It's hard to sell people on the marketing game. It's hard to sell people on sort of just these rhetorical flourishes. I mean, going back to like 2016, like the sort of Hillary Clinton is just like your abuela or whatnot. Like it's harder to sell people on that when people are materially, economically suffering, worse and worse, and you have no sort of alternative to Trumpian policies. When the Democrats are shooting down policies around student loans or whatever the case is, like it's harder and harder to just sell people on that.
Yeah, I mean, that goes to the point of political education more than anything. Go out and organize and educate people. I mean, here in Washington, D.C., as I mentioned earlier, Mayor Muriel Bowser will talk about her desire to end homelessness. And so if she knocks on a door and says to the person at the door, I'm going to fight to end homelessness, and I've already done X, Y, and Z. Surely she's built a few hundred units of affordable housing for seniors over the last few years. And then I come behind her as somebody that's not in office and says, I'm going to end homelessness. And they say, well, what have you done? Well, I say, well, I haven't done anything yet. We're not in power yet. What were we supposed to do? Well, they said, well, the last person, the mayor was just here. They said they want to end homelessness, and they've actually done something. So despite the fact that she's done nothing to the actual, I mean, the D.C. metropolitan area needs some 250,000 new homes to be able to curb the housing crisis we're facing. Nobody's educated enough to ask the deeper question, And as long as nobody's asking those questions, the Democrats can get away and suck up a lot of the good policies because they have a good marketing game. They do have a machine. They do know what television networks to buy commercial ads for and what radio programs. There's a machine there that continues to allow the Democratic Party to stay afloat. As long as people aren't educated, it's going to become extremely difficult to tear them down. One more Joe Biden story here. We just have a few minutes left before we do need to pivot to our Miss the Press segment. We need to pivot to that just because I get so much gratification and joy out of making fun of one Check Todd on Meet the Press. So, Brianna, I'll just ask you quickly. I don't know if you are misfits out there listening, but I don't know if you had the chance to see Lawrence O'Donnell's MSNBC show over the weekend. He invites on Joe Biden, and right before Joe Biden comes on, they must have said, hey, wouldn't it be great to have Stacey Abrams, the former gubernatorial candidate there in Georgia, and a rumored vice president pick, to come on the show. And so Lawrence O'Donnell is joined by Joe Biden on his left and virtually on his right by Stacey Abrams. And O'Donnell says, wow, Joe Biden, that was really exciting of you to bring on Stacey Abrams here. Anything urgent you want to share with us? Maybe an announcement? And you see Abrams' face kind of light up, like as if she's about to be named vice president, right here on Lawrence O'Donnell on MSNBC. And sure enough, Biden seemingly had just brought her on there just to be a crutch, I guess, and basically said, oh, yeah, no, just bringing her on to talk about voting rights. She's doing a great job there in Georgia. And Abrams' face just completely dropped. It's getting painful to watch, Brianna, this whole deep stakes. One, it seems like nobody realizes that the vice president has never been announced this early, at least in the last few cycles here. People remember Hillary Clinton announced Tim Kaine in July of 2016, and Obama named Biden in August of 2008. So we're months ahead of where historically VPs have been named. I wouldn't be surprised, though, given Joe Biden's just horrific appearances on any interview, that he does name somebody sooner than later to get another surrogate out there who can do the brunt of the interviews. I don't know if you had the chance to see it, Brianna, but it was pretty painful to say the least.
Yeah, I did see it, and I think you're absolutely right. It was hard to watch, and it was sometimes I just legitimately don't know what the Biden campaign is doing. I don't know what it seems like the media is always trying to play T-ball, and he's striking out at T-ball. He's got every sort of advantage that the media can possibly offer him. And the campaign continues to just absolutely strike out at all these kind of opportune moments. And I think you're also right. It's like Biden can't again, continues to have trouble formulating coherent sentences. It's clear that, like, he doesn't really have a deep comprehension, even when he's able to sort of articulate from the teleprompter or whatnot. He doesn't have a deep comprehension of what it is he's saying, or at least it doesn't seem like that to me. And it seems like for the Biden campaign, the sooner they can get anyone other than Joe Biden as sort of the public face, better. Because again, like, nobody's excited for Joe Biden, but they again, it is just entirely about, well, we have to defeat Trump.
Well, I mean, I will just briefly correct you. Joe Biden's pretty excited for Joe Biden. I think he might be the only one. Jamal Thomas, about 30 seconds left here before our break. Do you think Joe Biden names vice president well before when Clinton or Obama did, say after July? I guess let's say before July of this year.
No, I strongly suspect that he's going to hold that. I mean, he probably already knows who's going to pick, but he's probably not going to tell.
All right, fair enough. I guess we'll see.
No,
yeah, it's interesting theory. I mean, I guess I would lean towards it comes sometime in June just to get a second surrogate out there. But at the same time, those VP picks could end up hurting you because at that point, it's both of you who are running. It's hard to think that Biden can be hurt more than Biden will hurt himself by somebody else. But yeah, it will be interesting to see there, Jamar, if you're right. Brianna and Jamar, we do need to take a quick break before coming back with our weekly Miss the Press segment, one of my favorite weekly segments that we have every day here at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik Live in D.C. We're back after this.
So, Sean, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show By Any Means Necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm Bob Schlehuber here, sort of kind of with Jamarl Thomas, and it's time for our weekly Miss the Press segment, where we take a look at the worst interviews, worst questions, and worst guests from America's Sunday morning political talk shows. We continue to be joined by Brianna Griffith, the producer and host of the show People's Republic. Brianna and Jamarl, we start this week with Jake Tapper and CNN's State of the Union. The Trump administration sent out their hired guns this weekend to spin the administration's response to COVID-19. United States Secretary of Health and Human Services Alex Azar made the rounds on most of the weekend's shows. The core message, the Trump administration did really, really good at responding to the pandemic, like really good, guys. Not a single person had to worry about ventilators. Not a single person had to struggle to cover health bills, and not a single hospital was over capacity. And honestly, according to Czar, if it wasn't for how darn unhealthy some folks were before the pandemic, quite possibly no one would have died at all. If you don't believe me, take a listen here. Here is Alex Czar with Jake Tapper on State of the Union. Have a listen.
Every death is
just
tragic.
At the number of dead bodies.
Every death is tragic, but we have maintained our healthcare burden within the capacity of our system to actually deal with it. Unfortunately, the American population is a very diverse and it is a population with significant unhealthy comorbidities that do make many individuals in our communities, in particular African American minority communities, particularly at risk here because of significant underlying disease health disparities and disease comorbidities. And that is an unfortunate legacy in our healthcare system that we certainly do need to address.
You know, Brianna, unfortunately, we have health disparities due to centuries of racism and classism. But outside of that, everything seems great, right?
Yeah, it's sort of, sure that the match was lit there, but unfortunately there was a gas leak or something. Like the thing that's unfortunately is the entire injustice is the entire thing that was done wrong. It's just, like you can't chalk up all of this, you really can't chalk up any of it to just like sort of individual responsibility. I mean, these are the systemic injustices that people are criticizing. And to separate those from the actual issue of COVID, when one is essentially, the metaphorical gas leak while the other is the flame, when the two really are part of the same problem and part of the same injustice, it's disingenuous to say the absolute least.
Yeah, Jamarl Thomas, you started off with Andrew Cuomo in New York taking a victory lap despite the deaths there. And here's Alex Azar basically doing the same thing. Like, wow, aren't we amazing in the midst of the pandemic as the United States is nearing at 100,000 deaths? Nothing went wrong here except the unfortunate sense that a lot of Americans are unhealthy. I don't know, say maybe because of the sugar we pump across the country and into schools at young ages, or the vast amount of meat that we eat. I don't know, any of those things. Unfortunate, sure, but are we doing a great job? Of course.
I am shocked by the emancipatory size of this man's testicles to stand there and say that. I mean, basically, he's saying that everything was great. And we know that's not true. We have, 90,000 deaths? And 1.5 million people infected with it? And this was based on incompetence. This wasn't anything other than incompetence. You had situations where the federal government was literally taking supplies from other states and other places that was trying to get supplies for their particular cities. I mean, this was horrendous. And so, the death toll in the United States versus China versus pretty much any other nation outstripes it by 4 or 5 times. It's obscene. So the idea that he could stand there and say that is utterly shameless. I mean, that's astonishing that he can say that. That level of lying and dishonesty.
Well, don't worry, Jamarl and Brianna. There was more Trump officials making the rounds this weekend. They have the other pesky problem that's out there. That's still what to do with the whistleblower, Dr. Rick Bright. Dr. Rick Bright, as many of you will remember, is an immunologist who was the director of the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority. Bright was in the position until he was demoted to a position of lesser statute. Following the demotion, Bright filed a 300-page whistleblower claim against the Trump administration for its mishandling of the pandemic. At the core of it was Bright claiming the Trump administration had done next to nothing to prepare a vaccine. Bright is a vaccine expert, but the Trump administration was asking him to coordinate things that weren't responding with a vaccine, which was his job and his position and his background and expertise. And so he basically threw what some are calling a fit, or basically spoke up and worked against the president and got demoted. So on this week with George Stephanopoulos, the economic advisor to Donald Trump, Peter Navarro, is on this week explaining about what happened to Dr. Rick Bright, throwing him under the bus and clearing the path for the Trump administration's perfect record. Have a listen here to the clip of George Stephanopoulos with Peter Navarro.
Here's what happened with Rick Bright. It's an American tragedy, George. This guy is quite talented, but he was asked to be the field commander over at NIH to storm the testing hill with $1 billion behind him. Instead of accepting that mission, he deserted. He went into a foxhole, wrote up the complaint, and now he's part of a Capitol Hill partisan circus where he's just become another pawn in the game. And the tragedy, George, is this man has talent. He's a smart man. We could have used him on the battlefield. He's not there now, and it was because of decisions that he made. And it is a shame, George.
I love the battlefield, Brianna, is a bunch of old white dudes in the Oval Office, coughing and spitting on each other and having to test each other for COVID-19 every day. That's the battlefield that Peter Navarro's fighting on. What battlefield is he going out on? They're all protected. They're all super wealthy people getting tested daily, but then he uses this language of the battlefield. And they're asking the person, you're a radio producer and show host, Brianna. It would be like asking your station, asking you to run out and get lunch for everybody every day and saying, well, that's not why I've been paid to be here. That's not my expertise or specialty. And them saying, well, you know what? Then you're fired because you didn't help us go get lunch, and blankly staring, saying, wait, what are you guys talking about? We need to get our show on the air. That's basically what happened to Rick Bright. He said, look, I understand you're asking me to coordinate testing, but I'm an expert on vaccines, and that's my job. Why would I not focus on that? It shows the complete incompetence and ridiculousness of the Trump administration.
Oh, God.
And the other thing that kind of stands out to me is that it sounds so much, just the way he sort of framed that, it sounds like something out of The Apprentice, that sort of, he's a real bright guy. He's got some real expertise, but he's just doing the wrong thing. Like that sort of condescending, like, idea of, like, basically sort of implying that, like, hey, I know your job better than you know your job. I know you're doing a real good job, or I know you could do a real good job, but, you messed up here. That absolute, again, it's like this Trumpian condescension of sort of like formatively pretending you know everybody's job better than they do. I mean, that's what initially sticks out to me. But yeah, that whole other part of like it's. I mean, it is. It's almost like a lot of the Trump administration and a lot of the sort of upper levels here are being run right now like a reality show. They're not even being run by sort of like at sort of the baseline neoliberal, market mismanagement. It's not even that. It's just like a reality show almost.
Yeah, Jamal, I guess maybe the better analogy would be like being a civil service officer at the State Department and being asked to go walk the dog of your boss and pick up his dry cleaning. It's that level of incompetence that we're seeing right here from the Trump administration. They're going to have to go above and beyond and out of their way, Jamal, to cover up the malfeasance that was committed by this administration. It was interesting listening to Navarro in that interview. He was talking about how much he had been working with Trump and the administration going back to January, but obviously we know that's not true. The Trump administration dragged their feet as long as possible. Navarro had actually warned the Trump administration, and very few people responded to it, but now he reframes it as if his initial warning saying he had been to China, he had talked to the Chinese, he knew what was happening with the spread of the virus there, that it was coming to the United States, but now he's trying to reframe it as if everybody on the Trump administration and in the Republican Party was in on the same page from day one.
Yeah, we have video after video after video of Donald Trump looking into the camera saying it's going to be done by X state. It's going to be done by this state. It's only going to be 40,000 deaths. It's only going to be 80,000 deaths. It's only going to be like 200,000 deaths. Like, we have Donald Trump. It's as if Donald Trump doesn't believe that video picks him up like he's a vampire or something. It actually does. It picks him up quite well when he's going on those diatribes. I am a sucker for people doing military talk. I don't know what it is. When I hear that, I get tickled like nobody's business. He's on the battlefield and he's a great guy. I think the thing is that basically they are in a campaign mode. And while they're in campaign mode, and to be honest, Donald Trump does this under normal circumstances. If he loves you, he will give you every compliment in the world. If he hates you, he will put a knife in you. And his campaign staff have basically picked up that particular policy also. So they put a knife in the guy who was saying something bad about the administration, despite the fact, like you said, the guy's supposed to be working on vaccines and they got him working on something else. It's such a weird thing. Now the question becomes, Bob, do you think that he's held responsible for this? I think that's the question, right? I mean, Democratic policy, or Joe Biden policy for that matter, of sitting in his bedroom basically works because it gives Donald Trump enough rope to hang himself. Now, I don't think people should get all that dependent on those polls. In all of the swing states back during this time when Clinton was running against Trump, she was winning all those swing states, sometimes by 10 points. She lost all of those states. So, let's not get fancy on the polls. But Donald Trump's approval rating is still at like 49%. That rating, for the most part, hasn't been.
I think it's just too early. I mean, I think with the economy contracting more and more, with more and more millions of Americans
he starts to get blamed.
Getting their, absolutely. Yeah. And even in the states like Texas that we were talking about earlier, 25% reopening is well short of 100% reopening. People are going to be hurt for a long time. JCPenney over the weekend finally declared bankruptcy. Right. I mean, there's just going to be so many retail jobs. I mean, 2+ million jobs in retail already gone, and those jobs just aren't coming back. And I think that's where you see the long-term impact of this virus and the handling it.
There's one more part to this, Bob. With 42% of stores not reopening, Amazon, Walmart, any of those big dealers that have the ability to basically sell things online are going to basically pick up the slack for those people, which means those jobs aren't coming back.
Yeah, the money's still there. It's just a circulation issue. So it'll eventually go somewhere, and we'll see more money be consolidated amongst the ruling and billionaire class. Jamal, Brianna, I got one more, and as always, I love to end our Miss the Press segment with our favorite Meet the Press and Chuck Todd. Chuck Todd and Meet the Press decided that they needed to speak to COVID-19 conspiracy theories and discuss whether or not they, as a media outlet, should cover those conspiracies. If you cover them according to MSNBC, NBC, because MSNBC as well at this point with Chuck Todd covering for both channels. If you cover conspiracy theories, you fan the flames. And if you ignore them, you give them credibility since no one actually discounts them. It actually seemed like a logical thing to discuss and debate. So who does Chuck Todd and NBC bring on to talk about conspiracy theories? The one and only former FBI agent and the founder of Hamilton 68, Clint Watts. And if you don't remember Clint Watts garnered national media attention after testifying before the Senate Intelligence Committee about Russia's ongoing cyber and propaganda war against the West. So the main person speaking to the Senate committee, as well as has been on NBC and every other channel the last 3 years talking about Russiagate, is now the person NBC turns to talk about conspiracy theories in the time of COVID-19. It gets much worse. So let's have a listen here of Chuck Todd exchanging with Clint Watts on Meet the Press.
All right, let's talk about two aspects of this, though, that are a challenge here. One is a lot of people are going to criticize us for covering this because they're going to argue that we're amplifying or bringing attention to these conspiracies. What do you say to that?
If you don't address the conspiracy and it continues, if there's no rebuttal, people tend to believe things that have no rebuttal. If you don't rebut it, then that conspiracy continues to spread. At the same point, if you actually go and challenge that conspiracy, sometimes it can draw more attention to it. It can draw more evaluation. It's a delicate balance in the media and with the social media companies about how to police this sorts of information.
Yeah. So, Jamar, let me now remind our listeners that one of the board members of Watts' Hamilton 68 project, which continuously monitors roughly 600 Twitter accounts selected for their relationship to Russian-sponsored influence and disinformation campaigns, is New Knowledge CEO Jonathan Morgan.
Oh, wow.
Morgan is not only a board member of Hamilton 68, he was also one of the co-creators of the tracking system. A series of articles published about a few years ago, revealed that New Knowledge was closely connected to the U.S. intelligence agencies and has been widely cited as an impartial investigator of Russian meddling in U.S. politics. To bring it full circle now, New Knowledge conducted a false flag operation to influence the 2017 Alabama state election and make it appear that Russia was conducting a Twitter campaign to back its preferred candidate. Yep. The false flag operation was called Project Birmingham to promote an obscure right-wing conservative Republican candidate likely to draw votes away from Roy Moore. The operation also sought to artificially inflate click rates on anti-Moore news stories in order to encourage more such articles. Moore ultimately lost the election, as you remember, but the close ties between New Knowledge and Clint Watt have to be acknowledged. Clint Watt was connected directly to a false flag operation that was run here in the United States, Brianna, and now NBC, out of all the people, brings Clint Watts on to talk about conspiracy theories. Are you kidding me?
I'm almost at a loss for words. Well, I guess the first thing I would say is, like, as an organizer, sort of for anti-war and progressive issues across kind of Texas, I and so many other people, we were warning that, like, this Russiagate conspiracy theory was going to be used basically as a full kind of ideological frontal assault on the left, on progressive causes, and it was. And, like, at this point, like, people should be absolutely aware that the Russiagate thing was a conspiracy theory. It has all the kind of internal logic of a conspiracy theory, where anytime you refute this aspect or that aspect, it then just enhances and expands the conspiracy theory into something larger. Well, now it's, if somebody disagrees, well, now you're in on it. It's sort of the logic there. And this, like, there's no clearer case of that than these, like, New Knowledge false flags. This incident where basically, like, again, like, creating fake Russian bots to create the appearance that Russian bots were supporting the Republican candidate. And then how does it get reported in the Washington Post that this group was using, quote unquote, Russia-style disinformation? Well, it's like, no, that's American-style disinformation. The past half century or century. This is like key. This is what American-style disinformation looks like, is blame everything on Russia. It's incredible.
Jamal, maybe I should have said Clint Watts was probably the best person to come on and talk about conspiracies.
It's funny, though. His comment does make sense. I mean, I've always said that Alex Jones trips me out. He's one of the funniest guys and does what he does best, whatever it is that he does. It's hard to kind of really nail it down, but he's great at it. Now, I'm not scared of Alex Jones. I think he's putting on an act. I'm more terrified of his supporters who believe, exactly everything that he's saying. It is this kind of tricky thing, right? But some of these guys have to take some level of responsibility. This goes kind of the way you point at Chuck Todd, Bob. I mean, basically, these guys spend their day and time pushing a conspiracy theory. And Mueller put in his report about the GRU handing over the information and everything else. Fact of the matter is they just said in the report from Sean Henry, the person who was working at CrowdStrike, the president of CrowdStrike, that they had no evidence that the information had been handed or taken from the DNC systems. These guys have been pushing this stuff for 3 years. And like you say, bring this guy on as the authority on conspiracy theories. Like you said, maybe he's the best person for it.
Wild stuff, yeah. No, it was the perfect person to have on there. Congratulations, Meet the Press. It will never cease to amaze me. With that, we are out of time with this segment. A big thank you to Brianna Griffith, the producer and host of the show People's Republic. Brianna, where can people find more of your work?
Yeah, people can find People's Republic on Facebook and Twitter at the handle People's Radio ATX. And you can also find People's Republic as a podcast on Spotify, Spreaker, Stitcher, iTunes, or wherever podcasts are potted.
Brianna, very appreciative of your time as always. Thank you for joining us. With that, we turn to a break and close out our weekly Miss the Press segment. And as always,
you, Chuck Todd.
What's the most important hour of the day? It's the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon. On this show, we don't just deliver the latest headlines, we divide the real from the fake. Tune in to hear from some of the most brilliant political minds of today, get in-depth news and analysis that goes beyond the surface and dig straight into the details. Set your clock to the Critical Hour for a news perspective unlike any of those other guys. Tune in to the Critical Hour with Dr. Wilmer Leon, weekdays 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, and catch us on Facebook Live. You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Bob Schlehuber. We're coming down to the last 8 minutes of the show, give or take 30 seconds. So, Bob, which one would you like? We have soccer and naked, basically sex dolls. We have another story based on Justin Amash basically pulling out of the race. And we have another one based on Bill Pullman, basically Trump and Independence Day.
Whoever is making the Trump advertisements in these videos, Jamal, give them a raise. Congratulations for being highly entertaining. Let's start with the Bill Pullman story there.
Okay. So Bill Pullman basically he responds to an altered Independence Day clip. Now, wait a minute, I'm sorry, right here. So Trump was superimposed over Bill Pullman's head for the big, inspiring speech at the end of the movie Independence Day. Now, maybe he knew he just couldn't compete. Bill Pullman knows he can't. He told Hollywood Reporter, "My voice belongs to no one but me, and I'm not running for president this year." Oh, Bill Pullman is not feeling Donald Trump basically subsuming his role in Independence Day. We have a caller apparently. So, yeah, let's take a call, Michelle.
No caller.
Oh, I'm sorry.
The video, Jamara, was quite funny. If people haven't gotten a chance to see it, it is that last scene where he's like, "This is our Independence Day." And in the crowd, they also superimposed Sean Hannity's face and Tucker Carlson and all of his cabinet members in the audience basically rallying around. But then they keep the face of the kid's dad, who's like one of the characters throughout the movie, who's just kind of a down-out guy, like a low-beat farmer kind of person who's never like risen to the challenge, basically, the everyman in some ways. So quite a funny video, to say the least. Jamal, I'm also curious, tell me more about this sex doll story there in South Korea. I thought that was pretty funny, too.
The sex dolls was absolutely hilarious. So one of South Korea's professional football teams is very, very sorry that it filled the stadium up with sex dolls for a match that it played over the weekend. FC Seoul said it's just a terrible misunderstanding that the mannequins that it ordered to fill the real live fans at the recent game turned out to be sex dolls. Now, the team has been playing in front of cardboard cutouts of mannequins for the past few matches, but the newest batch of fantasy fans were a little too spicy for some. The club blamed the supplier. The supplier is pointing fingers elsewhere, but they're saying that it was just a silly accident and they had no idea these particular porous dolls were anything but fashion mannequins. Now, is this a big deal? Like, I don't see this as being... Look, unless it's like this kind of salacious lips where the mouth is open, I'm not all that bothered by this. Am I wrong?
No, it's nobody should be bothered by this. It is a funny story. I love that they were trying to play it off as like they were just like professional mannequins, very high class mannequins. They were respectful mannequin. Like they went through all the different listings, and instead of saying sex, they bought it from like a sex shop. So it was pretty evident that where they bought it from, and obviously they were in on it. It is a bizarre thing, just the future of sports, Jamal. I still just can't process what it looks like. This whole idea of playing games without crowds, or you're going to have limited numbers of crowds. I mean, none of it makes sense when it comes to going to concessions or going to the bathrooms or getting in through the park, because you have to go through different checkpoints where everybody's kind of bottlenecked in together to be able to watch an event. Even if they try to check everybody's temperature at the gate, then obviously we know there's asymptomatic patients that could be in the stadium where the sporting event's taking place. So I guess at this point, the best we can do is adult sex dolls for an audience.
I find this to be so funny. I don't entirely see the difference between the sex doll versus a mannequin. And maybe you may have, let's say...
Well, you haven't spent enough time with a mannequin and sex doll, Jamar. Let me tell you.
Well, I guess I'm saying, let's say for the moment that there was parts for that particular doll that was not necessarily in a mannequin. Let's say it was anatomically correct. Well, you don't know that, especially when they put clothes on it. So is it just the point that it's called a sex doll that was bothering them, or is it something else about it? I guess I don't know.
If you look at them, there's a little extra that goes into like the makeup and like the
does
the
it? Oh, okay, fair enough.
Fair enough. Other clubs, there's other people that are finding ways to fill their stands with some G-rated supporters. One South Korean club had called for fans to draw portraits of themselves and had posted those around the stadium. Others have filled the seats with stuffed animal mascots. Jamal Thomas, we got about a minute and a half left. I heard Justin Amash is not running for a third-party presidential bid. Am I correct on that news?
You are absolutely correct. Justin Amash, Michigan's ex-Republican representative, announced this weekend that he will not be running for president after all. Now, he toyed with the idea of being the Libertarian candidate, but said Saturday, after much reflection, I've concluded that circumstances don't lend themselves to my success as a candidate for president this year, and therefore I will not be a candidate. You think? I mean, he wasn't planning on winning the presidency, was it? He was just planning to be a breakout star, dark horse candidate.
Yeah, I guess his exploratory campaign did some exploring and came back and said, you know what? I don't think we can win this. I just don't see the path. I mean, what did they spend their time on there, Jamal, to come back with that report?
Yeah, that's funny, right? It's like, yeah, I think we're gonna have difficulty winning this one, Justin. It's like, okay, I don't know what he was thinking. I mean, but the reason that you run is not entirely to win it, right? I mean, sometimes you run it just to get 5% for your particular party, kind of like what the Green Party is doing, and to show your muscle in these various states. You don't run to win sometimes. Sometimes you run for political reasons.
5% for the Libertarians would be incredible. I mean, they were at 3% in 2016. The Green Party just above 1%. And in many ways, I think Justin Amash did what he wanted to do, which was raise his profile, and he caught a good media cycle day where he became the national news for the day. And he said, heck, that looks a lot better than me going on to spend the next 6 months of my life miserable, everyone in my family interrogated on these daily shows and just get a huge beating. Why not just take a good victory lap in the media and leave it at that? It seemed like it kind of worked out well for Justin Amash. He'll continue to be the champion of the never Trumper Republican and continue to stay in the spotlight to some degree, and maybe one day we'll see a libertarian run for president in some real way. But that won't be Justin Amash, and that won't be in 2020. Jamara, with that, we are out of time for today's show. We'll be back with a brand new episode of Political Misfits tomorrow. If you are behind and didn't get a chance to catch everything live with us today, you can check us out this evening on any podcast platform of your choosing. Big thank you to our guests today, Dr. David Belk and Brianna Griffith. Thank you to Ryan, Dimitri, Andre, and Saul for keeping us live on the air over the last 2 months. And a big thank you to the entire Sputnik News team. Shout out to our producer, Michelle Whitty, as always. And on behalf of myself and Jamarl Thomas, thank you for listening. Now get back to organizing.
Guys, I thank all of you for joining us. Great show. Definitely appreciate the guests. So Wesley Walker, bam. I think it's like this. Back at you, Wesley Walker. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. All right, guys, I'm going to end this. We're going to have contributor appreciation this evening. Let's say probably around 6 o'clock. And I will see you guys maybe before then, but if not, definitely then. Thanks all. Like, share, and